betrayed and broken. But I came back different. Charlie Wilson had always believed that love, real love, was built on trust. And for the first few years of his marriage, he had trusted Pam with everything. Their relationship had been the kind that made people envious. He was the dependable, hard-working accountant, and she was the lively, sharp-witted woman who could light up a room with her smile. But lately, something had shifted. It started with the little things. Pam would come home late from work at the supermarket, offering vague explanations about extra shifts or helping a coworker. She had always been affectionate, quick with a hug or a kiss, but now she pulled away when he reached for her. When they spoke, her responses were clipped, her laughter forced. At first, Charlie ignored it, telling himself that all couples went through phases. Maybe she was just stressed. Maybe she needed space. But then came the nights she didn't come home at all. She had an answer, of course. She always did. Work emergency, she'd say, brushing past him on the way to the shower. Or, I stayed at Claire's place. I was too exhausted to drive home. The excuses were paper thin, barely holding together under the weight of his growing suspicion. And the worst part? She had stopped looking at him the way she used to. There had been a time when her eyes would soften whenever she saw him, when she would curl up against him on the couch and whisper about their future, about vacations they would take, the house they would grow old in. But now, her gaze was different. Colder, detached, like he was a stranger in his own home. Then, one evening, Charlie found something that shattered his last ounce of denial. He had gone to the garage to grab a wrench when he noticed her car trunk was slightly open. It wasn't like Pam to leave it that way. She was meticulous, almost obsessive about keeping her things in order. Something about it sent a chill down his spine. He lifted the trunk, and there, tucked in the corner, was an overnight bag. His heart thudded in his chest as he pulled it out. It wasn't the usual gym bag she took when visiting her sister. This one was packed with clothes he had never seen her wear. Tight skirts, lacy lingerie, heels far higher than anything practical. A travel-sized bottle of perfume rested on top, along with a box of condoms. They hadn't used condoms in years. For a long moment, Charlie just stood there, gripping the bag so tightly his knuckles went white. This was it, the proof. A dull roar filled his ears as he placed everything back exactly as he had found it, careful not to disturb a single item. His mind raced, a storm of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. He could confront her, demand answers, yell, scream, ask why. But deep down, he already knew what she would do. She would lie. She would twist the truth until he was the bad guy for doubting her. And even if she admitted it, even if she confessed, what then? Would she beg for forgiveness? Would she tell him it was just a mistake? That it didn't mean anything? Charlie exhaled slowly, his breath shaky. No, he wouldn't give her the satisfaction. He was going to find out the truth for himself. And when he did, Pam wouldn't be able to talk her way out of it. Charlie sat in his car, fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum of war, each beat a warning, a harbinger of something he wasn't ready to face. Pam had just left work, but she wasn't coming home. She had her overnight bag slung over her shoulder, the same one she used for weekend getaways. But she wasn't heading to a hotel, not unless that hotel was on the other side of town, in the worst part of it. He followed at a distance, careful not to get too close. His silver sedan was unremarkable, blending into the city streets, but his presence here was unnatural. He wasn't a spy, a detective, or a man prone to paranoia. He was just Charlie, an accountant, a husband, a fool who had trusted too much. Pam stopped at a gas station on the outskirts of town. Charlie pulled into a spot by the air pump and watched from his rearview mirror. She stepped out of the car and, right before his eyes, transformed into someone else. Gone was the conservative work attire. She popped open the trunk and pulled out something else entirely, something meant for a different kind of evening. A black microskirt that barely covered her, a sheer blouse that left nothing to the imagination. As she checked her reflection in the car window, she tied her hair up high, exposing her neck in a way that made Charlie's stomach turn. This wasn't his wife. This was someone else entirely. A stranger. She hopped back in her car, her lips curling into a satisfied smirk. Then she peeled out of the lot, tires screeching against the pavement. Charlie hesitated for only a moment before following. The drive led him deeper into a part of town he had no business being in. Streetlights flickered like dying fireflies, casting jagged shadows over cracked pavement. Graffiti covered the walls of abandoned buildings, and figures lingered in alleyways, watching cars pass like predators picking their prey. Charlie's gut twisted. Pam pulled into a bar parking lot and slid into a space near the entrance. The place was infamous, the kind of bar people whispered about but never visited unless they belonged there. The Pit. That was its name, and it fit. It was a haven for bikers, ex-cons, drug dealers, and lost souls looking for destruction. Charlie had seen enough. He should have turned around, should have driven home, packed his bags, and walked away from the wreckage of his marriage before it swallowed him whole. But something inside him needed proof. Real proof. So he parked across the street, shut off his lights, and stepped out. Inside, the pit was a world of its own. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, the scent of sweat, leather, and spilled liquor clinging to everything. Music blared from the jukebox, a classic rock song with a deep bass that rattled the walls. The patrons were rough, all muscle and tattoos, their laughter guttural and mean. Charlie kept his head down, moving to the bar. He ordered a beer he had no intention of drinking and turned his attention to the mirror behind the counter. And there she was, Pam, sitting on the lap of a man who looked like he had been carved out of stone and violence. A massive figure, thick arms covered in ink, a beard that stretched to his chest. He leaned in, whispering something in her ear, and she laughed, head thrown back, eyes half-lidded with something Charlie had not seen in years. Desire. Not the forced affection she gave him at home. This was real. His stomach churned. His throat tightened. She ran her hands down the biker's chest, fingers tracing the lines of his tattoos. Then she kissed him, deep and slow, as if savoring him. Charlie couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. This was more than betrayal. This was obliteration. She pulled away just slightly, smiling against the man's lips, and turned her head lazily, casually. And then her gaze locked onto Charlie's reflection in the mirror. For a brief second, her eyes widened. Shock, caught, exposed. But it lasted only a moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, a smirk curled at her lips. She leaned in closer to the biker, her tongue flicking against his earlobe as she whispered something. Then she turned, and in a voice loud enough to slice through the music, she called out, "That's my husband, Charlie. Stop him. He's going to ruin this for all of us." The bar fell silent. Dozens of heads turned. The biker's grip on her waist tightened as he looked up, his dark eyes locking onto Charlie's with a mix of amusement and challenge. Charlie barely had time to react before a massive hand clamped down on his shoulder, spinning him around. The first punch landed hard. Then the second. Then the world exploded into pain. And all he heard before the darkness took him was Pam's laughter ringing in his ears. Charlie's pulse thundered in his ears as the room closed in around him. The dim bar, thick with the stench of stale beer and sweat, felt smaller by the second. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the blaring rock music, it all faded into a distant hum as his eyes locked onto Pam. She was draped over the lap of the man they called Behemoth, her fingers grazing his thick beard, her lips curled in amusement. His gut churned with sickness, not just from the betrayal, but from the way she reveled in it. And then she spoke. "That's my husband, Charlie. Stop him. He's going to ruin this for all of us." The moment her words hit the air, the atmosphere changed. The low murmur of conversation stopped. Heads turned. Eyes burned into him. Some curious, some amused, but most filled with the gleeful anticipation of a hunt. Charlie's survival instinct kicked in. He spun on his heel, heading for the door. Get out now. Get out before. A rough hand clamped down on his shoulder, jerking him backward. Not so fast, sweetheart, a voice growled. Charlie reacted instantly, twisting free and delivering a sharp elbow to the man's ribs. The biker grunted, doubling over, but Charlie barely had time to take a step before another man stepped into his path. This one was faster. A fist drove into Charlie's gut, stealing the air from his lungs. He staggered, the room tilting as pain radiated outward. Before he could recover, another blow caught him in the jaw, snapping his head to the side. The taste of copper flooded his mouth. The bar erupted into chaos. Boots thundered against the wooden floor as bodies pressed in, eager for blood sport. Charlie lashed out blindly, landing a punch on someone's cheekbone, feeling the dull crunch of impact. But it didn't matter. There were too many of them. A heavy forearm smashed into his back, sending him to his knees. A boot met his ribs, then another. A savage kick to his side stole what little breath he had left. Pain became his world. Through the onslaught, he heard Pam laughing, an easy, careless sound. It was cruel, familiar. He had heard it before, but never directed at him. Never like this. A monstrous shadow loomed over him, blocking out the dim bar lights. Behemoth. Charlie barely had time to raise his head before the man's tree-trunk fist crashed into his face. He went down hard, stars bursting behind his eyelids. Laughter rippled through the crowd, mingling with the sound of clinking glasses. To them, this was entertainment. Behemoth crouched beside him, pressing one meaty hand to Charlie's chest, pinning him down with ease. He leaned in close, his whiskey-soaked breath hot against Charlie's skin. "You thought she was yours, huh?" he rumbled. Charlie tried to speak, but blood filled his throat. He coughed, sputtering. Behemoth grinned. "She's mine now. Always has been. I've had her in every way a man can have a woman. Hell, every guy in here has had a turn." He laughed, slow and deliberate. Charlie's vision blurred. His body screamed in agony. And still Pam laughed. That sound, that betrayal, that was what hurt the most. Behemoth's grip tightened around Charlie's throat. "You're nothing," he sneered. "A punching bag. A joke. And when I'm done, you'll crawl out of here like the pathetic little bitch you are." Charlie wanted to fight, wanted to break free. But his strength was gone. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was Pam's smirk, cruel, victorious. Then, everything faded to black. Pain was a living thing inside Charlie's body, crawling through his ribs like fire, coiling around his limbs like lead. Every breath sent a shockwave of agony through his chest, but he forced himself to stay conscious. He was lying on the cold, filthy concrete of the bar's back lot, hidden in the shadows, dumped like garbage. The air stank of spilled beer, cigarette butts, and old motor oil. Somewhere close, a dog barked. A radio inside the bar played some old rock song, half drowned by the drunken voices of the men who had beaten him senseless. Charlie could hear them laughing. Pam's voice rang out among them, sharp and cruel. "You really messed him up, babe." Babe. That word sliced deeper than any punch. She had said it with affection, adoration, and not to him. Charlie's fingers twitched against the gravel. Blood caked one eye shut, his lips swollen and split. He could taste iron in his mouth. But he wasn't dead. And as long as he wasn't dead, he could still get even. Slowly, he tested his limbs. Pain flared in every nerve, but nothing felt broken beyond repair. He turned his head, scanning the lot. His truck was parked in the far corner, maybe 20 yards away. Between him and salvation stood Pam's sleek, silver sedan and a row of expensive motorcycles, the kind these guys treated better than their own women. No one was looking his way. With a quiet grunt, Charlie rolled onto his stomach. The ground was cold against his bruised ribs. He gritted his teeth, dragging himself forward inch by inch. Every movement was agony. Every movement was necessary. The bikers were too distracted by their own arrogance to notice. Behemoth, the bastard who had beaten him worst, was boasting about how he had put Charlie in his place. Charlie grinned through his pain. "We'll see about that, asshole." Using Pam's car for support, he pulled himself to his feet. His vision swam, but he stayed upright. His truck was so close now, the keys still in his pocket. His fingers trembled as he reached for them, the metallic jingle of the keychain sounding unnaturally loud in the still night. And then an idea struck him. A terrible, beautiful idea. Charlie turned his gaze to the bikes. A slow smile stretched his busted lips as he slipped into his truck. The engine roared to life, loud and angry in the quiet of the night. The voices in the bar went silent. Then came the shouting. Charlie threw the truck into gear and slammed his foot on the gas. The tires screeched as the truck lunged forward, straight into Pam's precious car. Metal crunched, glass exploded, the impact sending her sedan skidding sideways into the row of motorcycles. The domino effect was glorious. One by one, the bikes went down, a chain reaction of destruction. Chrome bent and shattered. Gas tanks burst. Alarms blared into the night. The sheer violence of it all sent a sick satisfaction surging through Charlie's veins. And then the front door of the bar exploded open. Behemoth and his gang poured out, their faces contorted in rage. Charlie yanked the truck into reverse, backing away from the wreckage. His ribs screamed, but he didn't care. He had taken something from them. And it felt good. "Get him," someone roared. Charlie didn't hesitate. He slammed the gear shift into drive and floored it. Behemoth lunged toward the truck, but Charlie jerked the wheel, clipping him with the side mirror and sending him sprawling. The last thing Charlie saw in his rearview mirror was Pam standing in the wreckage, her hands in her hair, her mouth open in horror. For the first time in months, Charlie Wilson felt something close to joy. But he wasn't safe yet. They were coming. And he was ready. Charlie's hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white, breath ragged. The engine of his truck roared as he tore down the desolate highway, his headlights cutting through the inky blackness of the night. Behind him, the glow of approaching motorcycles swelled like fireflies in the rearview mirror. Only these fireflies carried death on their backs. The bikers were coming. Adrenaline surged through his veins, dulling the pain from his broken ribs and bruised flesh. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, competing with the growling engines gaining on him. These men weren't just angry. They were hunting him. He had humiliated them, wrecked their precious bikes, and now they wanted blood. His blood. Charlie forced his truck past 80, then 90 miles per hour, the old engine straining under the pressure. But the bikers were built for speed. They were closing the distance with terrifying ease. The leader, Behemoth, was at the front, his massive frame barely contained by the bike he rode. His beard whipped in the wind, his eyes locked on Charlie with a murderous gleam. Then came the first strike. A biker pulled alongside Charlie's truck on the right, his face twisted in a sadistic grin. He swung a length of chain, the metal links whistling through the air before slamming against the passenger side window. The glass cracked but held. Charlie jerked the wheel toward him. The biker yelped, veering hard to the side to avoid getting crushed. He lost control for a second, just enough for his front wheel to hit a pothole. The bike wobbled violently before flipping, sending him tumbling across the asphalt like a rag doll. Charlie didn't have time to celebrate. Another biker surged ahead, pulling up to his left. This one wielded a crowbar, holding it high as he prepared to smash Charlie's driver's side window. Charlie made his move. He slammed the brakes. The biker, expecting resistance, wasn't prepared for the sudden stop. He shot past a truck caught off guard. Charlie yanked the wheel, clipping the bike's rear tire. The machine wobbled, and the biker lost control, skidding sideways before launching into the air. The sickening crunch of metal and bone echoed through the night as he hit the pavement. But Charlie wasn't out of the woods yet. Behemoth was still coming, his engine snarling like a caged beast. And he wasn't alone. 3 more bikers flanked him, their eyes filled with pure rage. Behemoth reached into his vest and pulled out something dark and heavy. A gun. Charlie's stomach dropped. The first shot rang out, shattering his side mirror. He ducked, barely dodging the second bullet as it punched through his windshield. Damn it. A mile ahead, the road curved sharply around a steep ravine. Charlie's mind raced, calculating. If he could time it right, Behemoth was closing in, gun raised again. Charlie made his choice. He wrenched the wheel hard to the right, veering off the road and onto the rocky shoulder. His tires screamed in protest, kicking up dust and gravel as he barely clung to control. The bikers, caught off guard, reacted a second too late. One lost control instantly, his bike hitting a rock and flipping end over end before slamming into a tree. The second tried to adjust, but overcorrected, skidding sideways. His tires caught the edge of the pavement wrong, and he was launched over the handlebars, tumbling into the darkness below. Only Behemoth remained. Charlie's truck fishtailed, but he corrected just in time to take the curve. Behemoth, roaring in fury, didn't hesitate. He followed. The problem? His bike wasn't built for off-road chases. Charlie saw it the moment Behemoth realized his mistake. The massive biker tried to slow down, but his tires hit a patch of loose gravel. His front wheel jerked violently, and then, just like that, he was airborne. Charlie watched in the rearview mirror as Behemoth and his bike flew over the edge of the ravine. For a moment, it looked like he might land it. Then gravity won. The monstrous man disappeared into the darkness, his furious scream swallowed by the abyss below. Silence followed. Charlie, breathing hard, slowed the truck to a crawl. The only sounds now were his own pounding heartbeat and the distant echo of wreckage settling in the ravine. The bikers were gone. He had won. But as he pulled back onto the highway, the pain in his ribs flaring anew, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not yet. Charlie drove with white-knuckled hands, the steering wheel slick with blood and sweat. His body screamed in agony, his ribs grinding with every breath. But he clenched his jaw and forced himself to stay alert. The distant wail of sirens made his pulse quicken. Had the cops found the wreckage? Were they coming for him? The highway stretched out in an endless black ribbon. The yellow lines blurring as exhaustion threatened to drag him under. He slapped himself hard, the sting keeping him grounded. 50 miles. That was how far he needed to go. Centerville had a trauma center, and more importantly, it was a place where no one knew his name. A town where he could disappear. By the time he reached the outskirts, his vision was swimming. His truck had become a coffin of pain, the air thick with a metallic scent of blood. He needed to ditch it fast. He took a winding side road, his headlights sweeping over endless fields, until he spotted Salvation, an old, forgotten barn, its wooden frame half collapsed, a relic of better days. Charlie turned onto the dirt path, killing the lights as he coasted to a stop. He stepped out, biting down a groan, and forced himself forward. The barn doors groaned in protest as he shoved them open. Dust swirled in the moonlight, and the scent of rotting hay filled his nostrils. He didn't have time to be careful. Charlie searched the glove compartment, pulling out his wallet. He flipped it open, staring at the ID he had carried for years. Charlie Wilson, a man who used to believe in love, in trust, in forever. A man who no longer existed. He tore out the ID, his fingers trembling as he ripped it to shreds. The pieces fluttered to the ground, little fragments of a life that had been stolen from him. A new name. That's what he needed. Something forgettable. He grabbed a gas receipt from his pocket. Printed at the top was a generic store slogan: Sam Adams, Fuel and Market. Sam Adams. He let the name roll in his mind. It fit. It was common, unremarkable. Charlie Wilson had died in that bar. Sam Adams would take his place. The drive into town was a blur, the pain swallowing him whole. He found the hospital by instinct alone, its sterile white lights glowing in the darkness. The emergency entrance loomed ahead, and he barely managed to park before his body gave out. By the time the paramedics found him slumped over the steering wheel, his mind was slipping into unconsciousness. "Sir, can you hear me?" A voice asked, sharp and professional. He forced his lips to move. "Mugged highway, don't remember." It was enough. They believed him. The gurney was cold beneath him, the bright hospital lights stabbing through his eyelids as voices swirled around him. Possible broken ribs. Facial contusions, swelling near the left eye. Dehydration. Signs of exhaustion. It didn't matter. Let them think he was just another nameless victim. A nobody. They ran tests, pumped him full of painkillers, and patched him up. He let himself drift, knowing that for the first time in days, he was safe. But safety wouldn't last forever. He had almost dozed off when the curtain around his hospital bed rustled. A man stepped inside, his uniform crisp, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Mr. Adams?" The officer's voice was calm but firm. "Charlie, no, Sam." Open his eyes. "Yeah." The officer studied him, his expression unreadable. "We had a report of a biker crash just outside of town. 8 injured, 2 dead. Witnesses said there was a truck involved. Know anything about that?" Charlie's pulse remained steady. He forced himself to frown, playing the part of the confused victim. "A biker crash? No. I got jumped on the highway. Woke up a few miles out." The officer held his gaze a moment longer, as if weighing the truth. Then, finally, he nodded. "All right. If you remember anything, let us know." Charlie exhaled slowly as the officer walked away. He had made it through. But deep inside, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Charlie parked his new truck a block away from the house, his house. He hadn't been there in over a week, but he didn't feel like he was coming home. Home was supposed to be a place of warmth, of safety, that had been shattered the moment Pam had laughed while he lay broken on a barroom floor. As he walked toward the house, every step felt heavier. His ribs still ached. The bruises on his face had darkened into sickly shades of yellow and purple, and the scabs on his knuckles itched like hell. But none of that compared to the wound inside him, the one she had carved with her betrayal. The porch light was on. She was waiting. Charlie hesitated at the front door, his fingers brushing over the handle. Then, with a slow breath, he pushed it open. Pam sat curled on the couch, wrapped in one of his old hoodies, her legs pulled up against her chest. Her eyes were red, swollen. A glass of wine sat half empty on the coffee table, next to a crumpled tissue. The moment she saw him, she gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. "Oh my God, Charlie!" Her voice cracked. Charlie said nothing. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. She scrambled to her feet, her hands trembling as she reached out, then hesitated, as if realizing she no longer had the right to touch him. I didn't know if you'd ever come back," she whispered. Charlie still said nothing. He just stared at her. It was a strange thing, looking at someone you once loved and realizing they were a stranger. The Pam he had married was gone. Maybe she had never really been there at all. Tears welled in her eyes. "Charlie, Her voice broke completely, and she buried her face in her hands. But Charlie just stood there, unmoving. Pam sobbed harder. "I made a mistake, okay? I was lost. I didn't know what I was doing." Charlie tilted his head slightly. "Didn't know what you were doing?" His voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it. She nodded desperately, stepping closer. "Yes, I was stupid. I got caught up in something I didn't understand. I thought." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I don't even know what I thought. I was wrong, Charlie. So wrong." He let out a slow breath through his nose, watching her crumble. There had been a time when her tears would have broken him, when he would have rushed to her, pulled her into his arms, and promised to fix everything. But that man was gone. She stepped closer, her voice growing more frantic. "Please, Charlie, I need you. I can't do this without you. Those guys, they're dangerous. I didn't know what I was getting into, and now they don't want me anymore. I have nowhere else to go." There it was. Charlie's lips curled slightly, a ghost of something that might have been a smirk if it weren't so bitter. So, you're not here because you love me, he said. You're here because they threw you away. Pam flinched. No, it's not like that, I swear. I was just having fun. Charlie finished for her. That's what you called it that night, right? Having fun. Her face twisted in pain. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Charlie studied her. The desperation in her eyes, the way her body trembled as she reached for him again, the way she clung to the past, as if she could stitch it back together with just a few apologies. But there was nothing left to save. He stepped forward, so close she could feel the heat from his body. For a brief moment, her eyes flickered with hope. Then he leaned in, his voice a whisper against her ear. I don't love you anymore, Pam, and I never will again. Her breath hitched. She pulled back, her eyes wide with disbelief. Charlie, please. Please don't do this. But he was already walking past her. Every step he took felt lighter. The weight that had been pressing on his chest since the moment he saw her in that biker's lap was gone. At the door, he paused, glancing back one last time. Pam stood frozen in the middle of the living room, her arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming down her face. There had been a time when that sight would have broken him. Not anymore. Without another word, he opened the door and stepped into the night, leaving her sobs behind him. Charlie Wilson had been a fool once. But fools learn. And Charlie? He was never going to be that man again.